Bishop Provenzano, thanks for your time this afternoon. I'd like to talk a little bit about mission, something you've talked to the diocese about quite often at your convention address and other talks in print. So the word's in the air because you've made sure it is here in the diocese. I wonder if we could begin by asking your definition or your way of understanding what the mission of the church is.
Well, we can immediately go to the prayer book definition that asks for the church to be on mission to reconcile people to each other and to God in Jesus Christ. Once we say that, once we use that definition, the truth is that the church is really to be at service to the people of God and the communities in which it finds itself. And so my definition of that has come from a sense of our parishes in the midst of these communities recognizing what are the elements that keep people from being reconciled to each other and having an understanding of God's grace and mercy at work in their lives in any significant way. And the truth is that even with the large numbers of people that are part of the Episcopal Diocese of Long Island, that most people are unchurched. Most people don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ. Most people don't have a relationship with their neighbors. Can identify a denomination or a faith group that they may have been born into, but don't practice any faith at all. In my mind, the mission of the church then in this diocese has to be to foster that kind of reconciliation with God and each other in Jesus Christ, recognizing that that comes by means of paying attention to the needs of those people in a local community. So, different here in Garden City than it might be in Patchogue, Long Island, or out in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. A real sense of recognizing what keeps people at enmity with each other and finding ways of bridging that. And as we talk about kind of local mission, if we look at that in regard to our parishes, it is to be creative in the context in which our parishes find each other. Oftentimes people will say, well, Bishop, our parish has existed for over 100 years, and we're doing mission. We do church on Sunday. We have a food pantry. We donate money to the clothing drive, or we donate clothes to the clothing drive, or we collect food for a food pantry. So we've been doing mission. All of that is not only well and good and holy, and we want to keep encouraging that kind of work, but then there's the rest of the life of that community. An example of that is my asking congregations to investigate adopting the local public school. It isn't for us to influence the school system. It's because oftentimes the most vulnerable members of the local community are the children that go to school.
So part of this mission of reconciliation, as it's translated into every local place, it'll differ what it looks like, but underneath the differences are that same mission is happening.
Yeah, because I think, in fact, what may be happening in Patchogue or Bed-Stuy or Garden City or Flushing, Queens, the context is different.
And the context matters.
And the context matters because, unfortunately, for too long, the church has imagined that if it has an 8 and 10 on Sunday, maybe a 5 on Saturday night, that it'll ring its bells, open its doors, and people will just come. And what we have discovered clearly is that the church is becoming insignificant and obsolete in those settings because it's not paying attention to the changing needs of the local community, and therefore people just don't come. I mean, and I've said over and over again that I don't believe that our primary mission is to get people. People will come to church as a byproduct of our mission.
What would you say about, I think that's a change, that's inviting a change in people's thinking. If there's a parish, let's say, here in the diocese, parish church, and perhaps over the years the number of people, by whatever attrition, maybe the mission hasn't been carried out as you're describing as well as it could be, or just people moving away, or death, or changes demographically in the neighborhood. There's a lot fewer people coming, say, than there were in 1980 or 1990. Perhaps somewhat naturally, the vestry or the priest might think, what can we do to get people in here? Becomes their first question. Mm-hmm. Are you saying, in fact, that there's a prior question to that?
Yeah, the prior question is, what are the needs of the community outside the doors of the church that that small group can begin to address? Mm-hmm. Once the church is known, the parish community is known as a partner in the community, it will become a place for people to come and worship. I think, if I can be so bold as to say, that I think it's why our efforts, particularly in the Northeast and particularly in this diocese, for evangelism have failed, is because we've put primary focus on getting people in the doors, filling the pews. Hopefully they sign a pledge card and they support the life of the local parish. And all that's laudable and what we ought to be encouraging, but the prior work has to be that it becomes a community of faith that is seen and known within the context of the local community as a place that cares, that in fact is showing the compassion of Jesus Christ in the midst of a community. Mm-hmm. It's pretty frustrating at times to see that we oftentimes complain that things are not going well in the life of the church, that we're not growing, or that we're struggling to keep our buildings open. And I guess I'm crazy enough to believe that maybe the focus shouldn't be keeping the buildings open, but keep the parish going. Mm-hmm. In some of my visitations around the diocese, I have said to vestries that in the 3-year period between this visit and the next time I'm here, you will probably have to struggle with making a decision. Either you're going to have a full-time priest run a full-time program and keep all of your buildings going. My suspicion often is that I'm going to come back in 3 years, and in some of our congregations, you're going to have to choose only 2 out of the 3. Mm-hmm. And so what is that going to be? And I really hope it's not just keeping the building open. Mm-hmm. Maintenance is not mission. Mm-hmm. I think that's pretty clear.
What kind of response do you get from people in putting those hard choices out there? Because I'm sure
a lot of fear, a lot of hand-wringing, a lot of concern about what does this mean about the future of the life of any given congregation. There's a lot of emotion involved because people will say, well, gee, I grew up here. I was baptized here. Mm-hmm. And my response to that fear is to assure them that nothing really would have to change other than their approach to mission. That I've been saying this over and over and over again, we're not running out of people. The population of Brooklyn, Queens, Nassau, and Suffolk is growing. We're not running out of people. We just need to recognize that we need to minister to those people as they come to us. And in some instances, we have to be creative around language, around culture. If we're going to be dealing with young adults, we need to possibly begin to address the fact that Sunday morning 8 and 10 isn't going to work. That, in fact, mission might mean that the major liturgy on Sunday is on Sunday evening, mm-hmm. And is open to young people and accommodating their time. We can either continually say, well, this is the way church was for me, and this is how I want to continue to do this, and my children are going to live in this way. Or we can say, we want the church to be a service to God's people, so how do we begin to accommodate? I have said to a number of congregations who have questioned me about the Sunday morning thing is that, we invented it. We invented Sunday morning as a celebration of the day of resurrection. We have attached to that all of our understanding of Sabbath. But in our culture, whether we like it or not, our culture has changed so drastically that Sabbath may be for a fair number of people at another time. And to begin to investigate, how do we gather the worshiping and missional community, not just on Sunday morning, but at other times, is got to be part of our strategy. And I've encouraged the clergy who are willing to do that to recognize that it may mean shifting things around. I think it would be, for many of our congregations, a real change not to have the main liturgy on Sunday morning. But in fact, I think that's probably where a lot of our congregations will go. Sunday morning and worship aside, one of the pieces about mission that I'm really concerned about is the number of churches, not just in our diocese, but I think across the entire Episcopal Church, who focus on Sunday as the main event, where I believe that Sunday is the time for gathering the worshiping community to be fed for their mission and journey that happens all during the rest of the week. And one of the byproducts of that concern is what I have encountered at different times is the destination parish. People drive in to a certain locale but don't live in that community. And so after everyone leaves on Sunday, other than other already scheduled times during the week, nothing is happening at the church for the community. And so over a period of time, the gathered, the neighborhood or the community, the town, begins to understand that if they don't go there on Sunday, that the church, that particular church has nothing to say to them and isn't really interested in doing any kind of ministry with them. The exception to that would be the congregations that gather because of a primary focus on linguistics or culture. It makes a lot of sense, particularly in our Great Neck Episcopal ministry, for the Korean congregation of St. Joseph's to come and gather at a particular place together so they can all be together, because there are cultural and linguistic needs that are specific to that group. But that's true of those kind of specialized ministries. It shouldn't be true of all of our churches across the diocese.
What if we take, you often, when you talk about mission, use the phrase and encourage local mission initiatives. You said in terms of the appointment of the new archdeacons and what you've given them as their work, their vision going forward, and the deans as well, that looking at the local experience of the community, ideas as to how mission should be done should be percolating up from that level to the diocesan offices, I should say, rather than the other way around. What if we take what you've called a destination parish as sort of, in one sense, an extreme case? If a church like that wants to respond to your call for local mission initiatives, what would be some of the steps that such a church would take to begin to do that? What steps would you take if you were in that context yourself?
That's a great question, because I think I have tried to put myself in that context in the sense of, what am I really asking parishes to do? When I say to a local vestry, look, we're not running out of people, intrinsic in that statement is you have to get out of the church building. You've got to go and become involved in the neighborhood. They've got to know you before you try to do anything with them, or you ask of them anything. And so the visibility of the congregation, even if it's a small group, even if it's only 20 people that are the remnant of one of our older parishes in some neighborhood, for them to take the steps to insert themselves into the population around the church, and I literally mean that, around the church. knocking on doors, going and visiting some people, doing the kind of advertising that says, here's where we are, this is what we do, here's what we have to offer, and then begin to, in that conversation, garner from them what is necessary. Oftentimes in my pre-visitation meetings with vestries, we share with them a demographic study that we've done here in my office. Oftentimes there's information there about the trends between 2009 and 2014, I think is the span of the calendar we're looking at right now. In that demographic study, we are able to share with the parish that there is a growing number of elementary school kids, or a growing number of high school kids, or a growing number of elderly moving into the neighborhood. That should automatically inform the conversation on the local level, on every level of parochial life. Do we renovate the building for a day school, or do we renovate the building and make it handicap accessible so that way we can do elder care? Mm-hmm. Those critical decisions mean that a parish is being thoughtful and faithful about doing local mission, knowing who the people are surrounding the church. Mm-hmm. It's why we plant churches in certain places. And so that initiative really needs to be taken. In certain places where the diocese has had the opportunity to insert missioners in certain settings, the one thing I've said to those priests as they build a team of lay leaders and maybe coordination with a deacon or a neighboring priest is, put on your collar and have every store owner get to know who you are, even on a first name basis. So that way, when something happens in the community, when there's a tragedy, when there are joys, baptisms, whatever, they have an identified person that they're going to turn to. Because the truth is, as we know now, most people are unchurched or underchurched. It will matter if we've made the effort locally to be known in the community. The likelihood is that we're the church that people will turn to. Again, it's not about getting them into the church. It's about being the church. It's about really being on mission. Several people have asked me to define that phrase. I use that phrase all the time. I'm not interested in people coming to church as much as I are being the church. I think in terms of mission, there are certain things that by our expression of faith, we bring to the conversation in larger society. If we're not out in the community giving voice and expression to that, then no one knows it, and no one can take us seriously. They then look at the church as an institution, one that's dying, two, that's irrelevant, three, that actually may be combative to their lifestyle. The only way for them to know differently is for us to actually act like the church, which is an invitation for them to come and then be a part of our life.
Yeah, complementary then to this going out, becoming known in the community, and understanding the community demographically and personally, first-name basis. What does this imply, would you say, for the church itself? The buildings that are there, the use of them. You know, I recently heard a conversation in which transitioning clergy into the diocese, and it was brought up, you know, one of the very new rectors in the diocese said, I would like it if one whole side of the church was just glass, so people could see in and see what was there. What do you have to say about, you know, sometimes over the years our churches have become places where there's a locked gate, followed by another locked gate, followed by a locked door. What should that look like in terms of?
Well, we had to break all the locks off and open up all the gates. There ought to be an opening up of our buildings. The buildings are tools for mission. They ought to be inviting. They ought to be able to be accessed by the community. And not just for the resources that they'll garner for the congregation. A losing strategy for parishes is when they imagine that what they ought to be doing is finding rental, people to rent out their space in order to provide for them the resources to do Sunday morning. That's contrary to the strategy that says we're going to invite people to come and use our space for the needs of the community, and they're going to share in the cost of running this building. The attitude is 360 degrees. I mean, it says a lot about the intention of the congregation to share its space, share the expenses, share the responsibilities, but also to really address the needs of the local community. One of our parishes in Brooklyn, the major focus of the work they do is English as a second language. The resources of the parish are focused on that kind of work because that's what's needed in that section of Brooklyn. It is the most precise way for the church to be the church. People have need. They're coming. They're having they're as part of a faith community worshiping on Sundays, but that the parish is providing for their very tangible needs in terms of moving forward. Most of them are new immigrants to our country. I think that there are other pieces in terms of cooperation with local mission strategies that would have our parish buildings just be used all the time. There is no use in maintaining space in order to preserve it for Sunday morning. The space ought to be used all the time. Inviting the community to share in the cost of that. It is one of the many ways that congregations, particularly where they see that their attendance is dropping off on Sundays, can actually have a strategy for mission that does nothing more than just open the building. Allow people to use the space when you're not using it. And then that helps maintain the buildings moving forward. The byproduct of that is everybody in the community is in and out of your building. And if what we know about society today, where so many people are unchurched, if there are events in these people's lives, they will then rely on the church. It clearly is an attitude of mission and of service rather than one of our protecting ourselves and our institutions against the rest of the world. When I hear of religious leaders talking about the world outside the church as if it were evil, even though there are evil elements in the world outside the church, it scares me to think that we have entire populations that call themselves Christians that think in that way, that somehow see what is happening in the world to God's people and not want to address them in any kind of meaningful way.
That kind of touches on, I wanted to ask you about getting to kind of the relation as you see it between the emphasis necessary on mission and the reality that we might not talk about all the time, but it's sometimes called spirituality, what we believe, deep within that kind of carries us into mission. You could call it the invitation, one way to put it, to know and to be known by the living Christ who comes to us in Scripture and Sacrament. What do you see as the connection between spirituality and mission?
Well, I think that they are so interwoven that one necessarily informs the other. I think the outward and visible expression, the sacramental life of the church, pushes mission into being tangible in the midst of people's lives. Jim Wallace, the editor and founder of Sojourners, has been quoted over and over again as saying that if a person calls themselves a Christian and has more than one winter coat in their closet, they're full of it. There's a connection between what one says they believe and how they have a relationship with Jesus Christ themselves, and what that expression is in their lives and in the midst of their life in the church. And so I think that when we talk about the living holy life, that naturally dictates that one will live a life of mission, that we will go out of our ways. We will inconvenience ourselves in order to do the work of Christ in the world. Too often, there has been in the history of the church a real firewall created between one's spiritual life, one's prayer life, and the expression of that. And I think particularly for Episcopalians, where we put such an emphasis on the incarnational nature of our life in the church, that it all has to have tangible outward expression. Otherwise, we develop a spirituality that has us become very inwardly focused. What's in it for me? My inner peace, my relationship with God, all of which needs outward expression in order to be of service to God's people, but also as an expression of our own spirituality.
Springing from there, then, a final question that really broadens out what we've been talking about. All around us, it seems in some ways suddenly, but that we're living in rather revolutionary times. As we sit taping this afternoon, just yesterday, Time magazine chose as their Person of the Year for 2011, the protester, meaning beginning from the man who immolated himself in Tunisia that began the Arab Spring, all the way through the Occupy movement from Wall Street to Main Street, and the recent protests in Moscow. What do you think, and I know you've stepped into Occupy Wall Street, been there, been in conversation with people, what do you think all this means for the church, for people of faith, and to take it back where we've been, for the way our parish churches are called to live?
I can go on about this forever. There is a moment here in the life of the church that we need to pay close attention to. I have been calling it the Francis of Assisi moment in the life of the church. The whole protest movement and its impact on the way the church sees itself sitting in the midst of any community is calling out for that moment in which we get to be really real about our life in Christ. I talk about the Francis of Assisi moment. There is that wonderful scene in Franco Zeffirelli's film Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, very colorful, as Francis is taking all the rich garments and throwing them out the window, that is expressive of the story of Francis's life, that I think the church is called to right now. We have got to step out of our buildings, our wealth, our trappings, into a real solid engagement with the needs of God's people in our time, because they're actually begging us to do it. The people of God in and outside the church are asking for us to pay attention to Christ as Christ comes to us in people who are in need. And so the movement, the whole protest movement, is really a call to the church to get real with itself. Some of the implications of that scare me. It means that we may have to divest ourselves of some of the trappings that we have gotten very accustomed to, and in our parish churches, to find the thin line between our own traditions liturgically, our traditions of incorporation of social life in the wider community of the church, and then taking seriously the need for mission. I think there hasn't been a moment like this in the life of the church in the last 30 or 40 years. And I would say that I want to encourage every congregation to take hold of it, to make use of it, to incorporate into its thinking, its planning, its mission strategy as we move forward, because it will make all the difference in